Ponderosa Creek Ranch, Wyoming Territory, 1878. I reckon a man ought to leave this world with his accounts settled. Not just the dollars and cents, but the truth of things. So I'm putting these words to paper while my hand still has strength enough to hold a pen. Doc Wilkins says I won't see winter, and I believe him. The cough's taken root deep in my chest, and each breath comes harder than the last. The blood on my handkerchief this morning was darker than yesterday's. This is the account of how Leanne came to my ranch and why I leave it to her now. There's been talk in town, ugly whispers that follow her like shadows. I want the truth known after I'm gone, not warped by wagging tongues or bent to serve someone else's purpose. I wasn't always a solitary man. After the war, I tried my hand at partnership, first with my brother James until the fever took him in '68, then briefly with a widow woman who couldn't abide the silences that had grown in me like weeds. By '72, I'd come to terms with my own company. Just me, 30 head of cattle, 6 horses, and land enough that I could ride from sunup to sundown without crossing another man's fence line. It was the spring of '73 when I rode into Silver Gulch for supplies. I didn't much care for mining towns. Too much noise, too many desperate men with whiskey courage, and the constant hammering from the ore crushers that set my war-rattled nerves on edge. But my stores were low, and Silver Gulch was the closest place to trade. The town had swelled since my last visit. The Silver Strike had brought men from all over. Americans, Irish, Germans, Mexicans, and Chinese laborers brought in for the railroad that would connect the mines to the main line. Silver Gulch stank of unwashed bodies, cheap whiskey, and the particular desperation of men who'd gambled everything on a dream that was already tarnishing. I'd loaded my mule and was fixing to leave when I heard the commotion outside Donovan's saloon. A crowd had gathered and men were shouting. Curiosity got the better of me, though I should have known better. Nothing good ever comes from a crowd of miners with time on their hands. What I saw turns my stomach even now. A girl couldn't have been more than 14, standing on a crate with her head bowed. She was Chinese, with her black hair cut short, wearing clothes too big for her frame, a man's shirt cinched with rope, trousers rolled up at the ankles. Her face was gaunt, eyes downcast, but there was something in the set of her shoulders that spoke of pride buried beneath the fear. Foreman Jenkins from the Golden Sunrise mine was standing beside her, red-faced and drunk, one meaty hand gripping her upper arm so tight I could see the white marks his fingers left on her skin. $3 owed, he was shouting, waving a ledger book with his free hand. Her uncle died owing the company store $3. Who'll settle the debt and take the Chinese girl? Trained to cook and clean, she is. I learned later that the girl's name was Leon. Her uncle had brought her over during the railroad boom, then died of fever in the camps. Jenkins claimed the man owed wages back to the company and, in his twisted figuring, that made the girl company property to be transferred. I suspect the debt was manufactured, like most company store accounts. Numbers juggled to ensure no laborer ever quite got free. It wasn't a proper auction. It wasn't legal by any stretch. It was just cruelty dressed up as business. But in a place like Silver Gulch, law was whatever the mine owners decided it was. The miners were laughing, calling out crude suggestions that made the girl flinch, though she fought to hide it. There was an old Chinese man at the edge of the crowd, perhaps the only one of her countrymen brave enough to witness this, his face set in grief but his eyes lowered, powerless. But it was the Collier brothers that worried me most. 3 of the meanest gamblers in the territory, they ran the card tables at Donovan's and had a hand in every dirty business from here to Cheyenne. They were eyeing the girl like wolves circling a wounded fawn. The oldest one, Seth, with his oiled mustache and eyes like chips of ice, stepped forward with $3 silver. "I'll take her," he said, and the look on his face made my blood run cold. I'd seen men with that look during the war, the ones even other soldiers kept their distance from, the ones who volunteered for night raids on civilian towns. I don't know what came over me. I've lived alone since the war, kept to myself, minded my own affairs. But something broke loose inside me. Perhaps the ghost of my mother, who'd taught me better. Or maybe the memory of a Chinese laundry boy I'd seen beaten to death in California years back while good men stood by and did nothing. $5, I called out. The crowd turned to look at me. I wasn't known to them, just some graying rancher from the foothills with a week's growth of beard and trail dust on my coat. $5 to settle the debt and take the girl, I said again, my voice steadier than I felt. My hand moved unconsciously to the colt on my hip, though I prayed it wouldn't come to that. Jenkins looked confused, but money was money. "Sold to the gentleman in the buckskin coat," he declared, already reaching for my coins. Seth Collier's face darkened. He spat a stream of tobacco juice that landed deliberately on my boots. "You want her that bad, old man? Didn't figure you for one with yellow fever." "Just settling a debt," I replied, not meeting his eyes but not backing down either. I counted out $5 silver, not 3, and pressed them into Jenkins' palm. "And paying fair, which is more than I can say for your operation." Jenkins pocketed the money with a shrug. "She's yours, then. No refunds if she don't work out." I paid him no mind and approached the girl. She wouldn't look at me, just stood trembling on that crate, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You come with me now," I said quietly, trying to soften my voice, though years of disuse had left it rough as gravel. "You'll not be harmed. You have my word on that." She didn't respond, but she stepped down when I offered my hand and followed when I walked away. I could feel the eyes of the town on my back as we left, the weight of judgment, assumptions, condemnation. I heard Seth Collier call out, "Enjoy your purchase, Monroe," and the laughter that followed. The old Chinese man caught my eye as we passed. He gave me a small nod, almost imperceptible, and I wondered what he thought, whether he saw salvation or just another kind of danger for the girl. I couldn't reassure him. I barely understood my own actions. We rode in silence back to the ranch. She sat stiff as a board on my spare horse, her few possessions tied in a bundle: a wooden comb, a small cloth pouch of what smelled like tea, a folded blanket embroidered with birds, and a knife with a jade handle that she kept close at hand. I noticed how her eyes took in the landscape, noting landmarks, perhaps calculating distances. Planning escape, I figured. "I ain't keeping you prisoner," I said after we'd ridden a mile or so. "You want to go, you can go. But there's nowhere safe for 50 miles in any direction for a girl alone, less so for a Chinese girl." She said nothing, but I saw her shoulders drop a fraction. When we arrived at the ranch as dusk was falling, I showed her to the small room off the kitchen. It had been James's before the fever, and I'd kept it clean out of some misplaced notion he might return. "This is yours," I told her. "There's a lock on the door. Use it if it gives you peace." I showed her the kitchen, the pump for water, the outhouse. She followed silently, taking it all in with those watchful eyes. I gave her a clean nightshirt of mine, far too big but better than nothing, and left her to settle in. That night I heard her crying through the wall. Soft, muffled sobs she was trying to keep quiet. It was the most human sound I'd heard in my house for years, and I didn't know whether to be grateful for it or terrified. For 3 days, she barely spoke. She would emerge only when I was out of the house, then retreat to her room at the sound of my boots on the porch. She ate little of the beans and salt pork I left for her. I found dishes washed and put away, though, so I knew she was eating something. On the 4th morning, I woke to find the cabin floor swept clean, the previous night's coffee pot scoured of its grounds. By the end of the week, the windows were washed clear enough to make me realize how grimy they'd been before, and the shelves organized with a logic I couldn't quite follow but appreciated nonetheless. She was making her presence known in small ways, though she still wouldn't speak to me directly or look me in the eye. I left a small pouch of coins on the kitchen table with a note. "Yours, not payment, just to have." The next day, the pouch was gone. I took to leaving paper and pencil out as well in case she wanted to write anything, but they remained untouched. It was nearly a month before she told me her name was Leanne. I'd gone out at first light to tend a heifer struggling with her first calf. When I returned, muddy and tired, there was a pot of something fragrant simmering on the stove and a cup of tea. Real tea, not the chicory mess I usually drank, steaming on the table. She stood in the corner, watching me cautiously. "Thank you," I said, taking a careful sip. It was nothing like the bitter brews I was used to, but smooth and somehow floral. "Jasmine," she said, her voice so soft I almost missed it. "I am Leanne." "Elijah," I replied, fighting the urge to say more and scare her back into silence. "Pleased to know your name, Leanne." 2 more weeks passed before she would sit at the table while I ate. She prepared meals now, simple but far better than my own cooking. We established a pattern. I would eat while she watched, then she would eat after I left the house. I took to lingering longer at the barn than necessary, giving her time. By fall, she had planted a small garden behind the house, coaxing vegetables from the hard Wyoming soil with a patience I couldn't fathom. I built her a fence to keep the deer out, and she nodded her thanks, the closest thing to a smile I'd seen on her face. The first time I had to ride into town for supplies, I saw the fear return to her eyes. "I'll be back before sundown," I promised. "Bar the door while I'm gone." When I returned, I half expected to find her fled. Instead, she'd organized my pantry and mended a shirt I'd torn weeks before. That night, she spoke her first full sentence to me. "The garden needs water barrels for when you are away." I built them the next day. The few neighbors I had were quick with their judgment when word spread about my purchase in Silver Gulch. Widow Carson, who'd brought pies every month since James died, though whether out of charity or courtship I never could tell, stopped visiting altogether. Preacher Mills rode out special to remind me of hellfire and the sins of lying with heathens. Even old Tom Bradley, who I'd known since before the war, who'd pulled me drunk from more than one ditch in our younger days, asked outright what I was keeping that Chinese girl for. "She's not kept," I told him. "She's free to go anytime she chooses." "That ain't how folks see it, Elijah," he warned. "There's talk." But where would she go? A Chinese girl alone in the territory wouldn't last a week. We both knew it, though we never spoke of it. So she stayed, and I made sure my rifle was cleaned and loaded each night. That winter was harsh. Snow piled high against the cabin walls, and wolves came down from the mountains, taking 2 of my calves despite my vigilance. Leon and I were trapped together in the small cabin for days at a stretch. I showed her the worn copy of the Iliad my father had given me, and found she could read some English but struggled with the older words. "My uncle taught me," she explained one evening, the firelight casting her face in gold. "He said to survive in America, I must read America's words." "Smart man, your uncle," I said. "He died owing nothing," she said firmly, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. "The debt was a lie." "I know," I replied. "I'm sorry for what happened to you." She nodded once and returned to the book. By the second year, things had settled into a rhythm. Leon kept the house and garden, which had expanded to include herbs I couldn't name and vegetables I'd never seen before. I worked the cattle and horses, gradually increasing my herd as funds allowed. We existed around each other like 2 planets in careful orbit, separate but aware. She was clever with numbers and began keeping the ranch accounts in a neat hand that put my chicken scratch to shame. When I found her one evening struggling over an old dictionary, mouthing words to herself, I started teaching her to read English better. "This word is sovereignty," I explained, pointing to a passage in the newspaper. "What does it mean?" she asked. "It means to rule yourself," I said, "to be beholden to no one." She nodded thoughtfully. "A good word." In return, she taught me a few words in her language. "Xiexia," for thank you. "How," for good. And she showed me how to make dumplings that tasted like clouds, her hands quick and sure as they folded the delicate dough. The incident with the Collier brothers came in the winter of '75. Word had spread about my arrangement, as folks took to calling it. I'd had to use my fists once in the general store when a drummer passing through made a lewd comment. After that, people mostly kept their distance. But Jake Collier, the youngest of the brothers, rode drunk onto my property one December evening. I was in the barn when I heard Leon's warning shout from the house. I grabbed my Winchester and ran out to find him dismounted at my front door, calling for the chinny whore to come out. I met him at the steps with my rifle leveled at his chest. "She ain't for visiting," I told him, my voice deadly calm though my heart was hammering. "Get off my land." "Selfish old man," he slurred, swaying in his saddle. "Seth says you're keeping her all to yourself. Says maybe we should see what all the fuss is about." "Your brother's welcome to try," I said. "I'll bury what's left of him out back with the other varmints." I fired a shot over his horse's head, and the animal reared, nearly unseating him. He galloped away, cursing, promising to return with his brothers. That night, I sat up watching the road until dawn. Before I went out to the morning chores, I told Elian she should always keep the shotgun near when I was out working the far pastures. She looked at me for a long moment, then said, "I know how to shoot, Mr. Elijah. My uncle taught me this too." It was the first time she'd called me by name. Something shifted between us that day, an acknowledgement that whatever strange arrangement we had, we were in it together now. The Colliers never did come back. I learned later that Seth had run afoul of a U.S. Marshal over in Laramie and was serving time. The other brothers drifted east, looking for easier pickings. The years passed quiet after that. Leon grew from a frightened girl into a composed young woman. The ranch expanded. I added a proper barn, then a smokehouse built to Leon's specifications. She had a way with the chickens, and even the most ill-tempered horses would gentle under her hand. She planted an orchard and tended beehives that produced the sweetest honey I'd ever tasted. Folks still talked, of course. There was speculation that she was my concubine, or that I was raising her for some unsavory purpose. The truth, that we were just two lonely souls who had found an unexpected companionship, seemed beyond most people's understanding. Some of the Chinese railroad workers would nod respectfully to her when we went to town, but they kept their distance, perhaps fearing association. Once, a young cowhand new to the area tried to court her, bringing a ribbon for her hair and stammering compliments. She was polite but firm in her refusal. Later, I asked if she was sure. He seemed a decent enough young man. "I do not wish to belong to any man," she said simply. "Here, I belong to myself." I understood then that whatever freedom I thought I'd given her, she'd had to claim it for herself. I never once touched her improperly, never thought of her as anything but the child she was when she came here. Some nights I'd wake in a cold sweat, thinking of what might have happened had the Colliers taken her. Other nights, I'd wonder if saving her had been enough to balance the scales of my life. There was blood on my hands from the war, not all of it from combat. I'd done things I never spoke of, things that haunted the edges of my dreams. But in this one thing, perhaps I'd done right. The ranch prospered in small ways. We weren't rich, but we wanted for nothing essential. Leon began selling her honey and preserves in town, establishing her own reputation separate from mine. People still whispered, but now they also sought out her remedies for winter coughs and her advice on troubled gardens. As she grew more confident, I saw glimpses of who she might have been without the hardships life had dealt her. Quick to laugh at the antics of spring calves, fierce in defending a nestful of orphaned rabbits from my suggestion they'd make good stew, proud of the first time she broke a wild Mustang without my help. In the summer of '77, Leon saved my life when I took a fall from the roof I was mending. My leg broke badly, the bone jutting through the skin. She said it herself, having watched the doctor do the same for a ranch hand the year before. Then she rode through the night to fetch Doc Wilkins, who said she'd done as fine a job as he could have. While I was laid up, she ran the ranch entirely, managing the hands I'd hired for the season, overseeing the branding of new calves, negotiating the sale of 3 horses to a passing Army patrol. I'd taught her what I knew over the years, but she'd clearly been paying closer attention than I realized. Last spring, when the cough first took hold, Leon rode for the doctor herself. I tried to wave her off. Just a winter chill, I said, but she was insistent. You saved my life, she said firmly. Now hush and let me help. When Doc Wilkins came, she stood in the corner of the room, watching him examine me with eyes that missed nothing. The doctor's face told me what I needed to know before he spoke a word. Consumption, he said quietly. Advanced, I'm afraid. Leon's expression didn't change, but I saw her knuckles whiten where she gripped her apron. Your daughter takes good care of you, Doc said as he packed up his bag, leaving medicines I knew wouldn't help. Neither of us corrected him. It was then I decided to change my will. I rode to Laramie the following week, against Leon's protests and the doctor's orders, and had Lawyer Evans draw up the papers. The ranch, the cattle, the horses, everything would go to Leon upon my death. Evans raised his eyebrows but asked no questions. He's seen stranger things in the territory. He did warn me that some might contest a Chinese woman's right to own property. Let them try, I said. I've got friends who'll see it through, and she's got a good head and a strong will. When I returned, weaker for the journey, I found Leon had planted apple trees along the south fence, trees that wouldn't bear fruit for years to come. The sight of those saplings bending in the wind but firmly rooted struck me harder than I expected. This is your home now, I told her that evening, showing her the papers. It will be yours after. She took the document with careful hands, reading slowly, her lips moving over the legal language. Why? She asked finally. How could I explain? This slip of a girl from across the ocean had given purpose to my final years, had transformed a lonely old man's existence with her quiet determination, had made a home where before there had only been a house, had shown me that even a life as bent and broken as mine could still nurture something good. Because it's right, was all I said. She held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded once, accepting my inadequate answer. Then I will learn all I need to keep it, she said. The sickness has progressed faster than even Doc Wilkins predicted. The summer heat makes breathing harder, and some days I can't rise from my bed. Leon has hired a young cowhand, Billy Grierson, a steady boy despite his tender years, to help with the heavy work. I've watched from my window as she teaches him the ways of the ranch, just as I once taught her. Now, as I write these final words, I hear Leon moving about the kitchen, preparing a broth I no longer have the appetite to eat. She's added wild ginseng, believing it will strengthen my lungs. She'll bring it anyway, and sit beside the bed until I manage a few spoonfuls, her face composed but her eyes betraying her concern. Yesterday, the banker rode out from town, checking on his investment, he claimed, though it was paid in full years ago. I heard him suggest to Leanne that she'd be better off selling after my passing, that a woman alone, especially a Chinese woman, couldn't manage such an operation, that he knew several interested parties. Her reply was too soft for me to catch, but he left shortly after, and I noted he was riding faster than was prudent in the midday heat. I'm not a religious man, but I believe there must be some accounting in the end. I've done wrong in my life. I fought for the South in a war I didn't fully understand. I've taken lives and harbored hate. There are marks on my soul that no amount of good deeds can erase. But in Leanne, perhaps I found some small redemption. Not forgiveness, I don't believe the world works that way, but a chance to put one thing right in a life full of wrongs. Let it be known that Elijah Thomas Monroe did not buy a Chinese girl, as the gossips say. I paid a debt that was not hers to bear. I offered sanctuary when the world offered only cruelty. And in return she gave an old man back his humanity when he'd thought it long lost. This ranch is hers by right of the sweat and care she has poured into it, by the calluses on her hands and the determination in her heart. Any who challenge this will answer to whatever remains of my reputation in these parts, and to the friends who've promised to stand behind my wishes, Tom Bradley, Doc Wilkins, and Marshall Kent among them. I ask only that she plant willow by the creek where I'm to be buried. I've always favored the sound of wind through willow leaves. It reminds me of my mother singing, long ago in Tennessee, before the world taught me its harder lessons. And if, in years to come, some should remember the strange pair we made, the grizzled rancher and the Chinese girl, let them remember this. Family is not always made by blood. Sometimes it's forged in the unlikeliest of circumstances, tempered by hardship and stronger for the making. Written by my own hand this 17th day of July, 1878. Elijah Thomas Monroe. The dry Wyoming wind rustled the pages as Leon finished reading the confession beside the fresh grave. 6 months had passed since Elijah's death in the deep of winter. The willow she'd planted was just beginning to take root, its slender branches swaying in the prairie breeze. She carefully folded the papers and placed them in the pocket of her dress. A dress she'd sewn herself from fabric bought with her own money, from the ranch that was now truly hers. The banker had come again last week, with another offer and thinly veiled threats about how difficult life could be for someone in her position. She had shown him the door with a quiet dignity that would have made Elijah proud. The townspeople still whispered when she rode in for supplies. Some still called her Monroe's Chinny behind her back, but others had begun to seek her out, for her honey, her vegetables, her knowledge of horses. The young cowhand, Billy, had stayed on, loyal to her instruction and respectful of her authority in a way that surprised the neighboring ranchers. Leon touched the weathered stones she'd placed to mark Elijah's grave. She had carved his name herself, the English letters now as familiar to her hand as the Chinese characters she still used in her private journal. "I have made our home strong," she said softly in her native tongue. "I keep the books as you taught me. The north pasture has new calves. The apple trees will bear fruit this year." A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals that rose from the sun-warmed earth. In the distance, the mountains stood blue and eternal against the sky. This strange land had become her own, in ways her uncle could never have imagined when he brought her across the ocean. Leon rose to her feet, brushing the dust from her skirt. The confession would be locked away in the strong box beneath her bed, a testament to a man who had found his redemption in an unexpected place, and to a girl who had found her sovereignty in the most unlikely of circumstances. She turned and walked back to the house, her house now, her steps sure and steady on land that had become her home. There was much to be done before sundown. The ranch would not run itself, and Elijah Thomas Monroe had not raised a woman who shied from hard work. As she crested the small hill that overlooked the homestead, Leon paused. From here, she could see it all: the cabin with its new coat of whitewash, the expanded garden with rows of vegetables stretching toward the horizon, the strong fences enclosing healthy cattle, the smoke rising from the chimney where she'd left stew simmering. "I will make you proud, Mr. Elijah," she whispered to the wind. Then she continued on her way, the confession safe in her pocket, its words etched in her heart, its promise fulfilled in every step she took as the rightful mistress of Ponderosa Creek Ranch.